George Barnard was born on December 1st, 1931 to Coral and Josephine Barnard. George and his two older brothers were raised on a farm just outside the small village of Good Thunder in southern Minnesota. George attended Good Thunder Public School, where he was just one of 5 boys in a class of 12. At 15, tragedy struck. George's father unexpectedly passed away due to complications from surgery. In high school, George was active in student council and served as senior class president. George was a gifted athlete and earned 7 letters in basketball and baseball, but the baseball diamond is where George really shined. He was a slick fielding infielder and a left-handed hitter who simply loved the game. George graduated from Good Thunder High School in 1949. He enrolled at the College of St. Thomas, where he was a 2-year letter winner in baseball. It became apparent that George's future would be in education and athletics. As a 21-year-old, he wrote,
I am thoroughly sold on the benefits both in mind and body gained by an individual who participates in sports. The opportunities to build character, confidence, and a sense of responsibility in a youngster are too great to be measured in statistical units. For this reason, I believe a teacher or a coach can obtain a great deal of satisfaction and pleasure from watching his efforts develop and enrich the lives of others.
In college, George also joined the Air Force ROTC. Upon graduating from St. Thomas in 1953, he was immediately deployed to Korea and into the Korean War. He served as a first lieutenant and maintenance officer with the 5th Air Force and was honorably discharged in 1955. After returning to the U.S., George began his postgraduate studies at Mankato State, where he also worked as a student teacher and became the first director of MSU's intramural sports program. In February of 1956, George married Roseanne Weidert, his lifelong love and unpaid personal assistant. Those who knew them well considered George and Roseanne to be a perfect team. Also in 1956, George accepted a position teaching physical education, health, and biology at Waterville High School. He was also the varsity baseball coach and served as an assistant coach for both football and basketball. George's first-year baseball team had a less than spectacular season, finishing 1-8. But just 3 years later, the Buccaneers began piling up conference championships. Waterville won 7 conference titles in the 1960s and 9 in a span of 15 years. George coached 3 players who went on to play professional baseball. George also worked part-time as the first and exclusive Minnesota representative for Joe Paul Industries, the makers of Jugs baseball pitching machines and football passing machines. He introduced Jugs machines to teams throughout the state, including the Minnesota Vikings. George retired from teaching and coaching in 1978 to accept the newly created position of Director of Community Services. In 1982, George added the title of Director of Athletics to his resume and served in this capacity for 7 years. George was the type of person who always looked for better ways of doing things. He served as Executive Secretary of the Minnesota State High School League Region 4A and as Chairman for Section 3C football. He also served on the Region 4A Realignment Committee and the District 13 Bylaw Committee to the MSHSL. Locally, he developed and reorganized community booster clubs for athletics and coordinated successful funded drives for new scoreboards, press boxes, and other improvements to athletic facilities. George was honored with awards and special recognition many times throughout his life, but the one that meant the most to him was being named the State Class A Athletic Director of the Year in 1990. George and his wife Roseanne were happily married for 56 years. They had 4 children and 5 grandchildren, all of whom considered them to be the ultimate role models. They put the needs of friends and neighbors above their own, doing their best to serve and improve their small little corner of the world. In July of 2012, former students, ball players, and friends gathered at the baseball field to offer one last show of support for George and all that he had done for his community. On that day, the home team dugout, where he spent so many days of his life, was named in his honor. George Barnard passed away in 2013.
If my father George was here today, he would be incredibly humbled and grateful for this award, and I know my mom Roseanne would be as well. Dad would want to thank everybody. Certainly he would start with the MnIAAA selection committee. I know he'd also want to thank Jeff Barnard, the current athletic director at Waterville Legion Morristown, who nominated Dad. He would also want to thank all of those who submitted such wonderful letters of recommendation. Those meant an awful lot to him. Certainly he'd want to thank the communities of Waterville Legion and Morristown for all they did to make his life as enriching as it was. And finally, of course, he would like to thank his lovely wife, Roseanne. They were wonderful partners, and they meant a lot to each other, and Mom had a lot to do with Dad's success, and he would certainly say that.